Have you told your friends that you see ghosts?
Oh, absolutely not.
Gina Rodriguez returns in Not Dead Yet.
I'm back, baby.
Who is that?
Oh, she's the obituary writer.
And Brad Garrett joins the brilliant ensemble cast.
Titan, Maverick, Titan of all Mavericks. These are all words used to describe me.
Not Dead Yet. Season premiere. Tonight, 8:30, 7:30 Central on ABC. And stream on Hulu.
It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
So last week on the Happy Families podcast, we had a series of 5 conversations, completely different to what we normally do on the podcast, talking with people about their school experiences, primarily what went wrong at school, why school wasn't a good experience for them, and how they lived extraordinary, successful lives in spite of their lack of success at school. We've been having these conversations because right now, right around the nation, pretty much every state and territory has their Year 12 school leavers completing their final exams ever at school. And then on Friday, we wrapped up the week with a fascinating discussion with a Flinders University academic, Nigel Howard, talking about what happens on average when kids don't finish school. Kylie, I want to use today's podcast as not a recap. We don't need to summarize what was said. People can listen to, and hopefully did listen to, all 5 of those conversations. They were fascinating. But really to, I guess, unpack and play around with the ideas that came up. What were your overall impressions as you listened to 4 people who dropped out of school, never finished uni, and went on to have extraordinary lives, and then Nigel's, I guess, balancing act as he reflected on what happens when we don't finish high school? What were your impressions?
I think every single person acknowledged how important education is. It's paramount to our ability to progress in life. But they might have left school, but they never stopped learning. And I think the emphasis for us as parents is helping our children to stay curious in their environment, regardless of what that curiosity leads them to do. While ever they're curious, they will seek learning and progression.
Over the weekend, I had a conversation with somebody who's a deputy principal at a Queensland school. And the conversation essentially was this guy saying, we are not helping kids to become lifelong learners at school. School is destroying the desire that kids have to learn. Kind of taps in with a conversation that you had with our youngest with this whole homeschooling thing that we're going to talk about on Friday, where she has indicated now she's had a little bit of time off school. She's ready to learn. She's anxious to learn. She wants to get into it. She's almost rekindled or rediscovered what learning could be now that she's had time away from the school environment. The discussion I found fascinating with Nigel Howard talking about the negative results in people's lives when they don't finish high school. Now, obviously, we spoke to a couple of people who had extraordinary lives in spite of not finishing high school. I wonder if you have any insights or reflections on what Nigel had to say.
One of the biggest challenges I see in our kids today, comparative to when we were going to school, is the level of anxiety and stress associated with those school leavers' exams. Exams are stressful in and of themselves. They put us under pressure. And regardless of whether we know our stuff or not, most of us have an element of stress walking into an exam room with exam conditions.
And I want to just add here as well, I don't know of any situation in real life once you leave school where you experience that kind of pressure. Like if you're in a profession and you have to do anything at all, you just perform your role, right? You never sat down in a room and told to recall all the information that you need to know about
X, Y, and Z. You've got half an hour to do it.
Exactly.
And you can't talk to anyone.
Now, obviously, you need to know how to perform surgery. You need to know how to stand up in the courtroom and speak. You need to know how to, I don't know, write an essay or do your work. We all have a performance level. But what happens is you take on a job and you receive training and you develop as you're going through that. And then you start to perform. And when you make mistakes, there are people around you who support you and say, oh, not like that, like this, try that again. And it just seems to me that the entire school experience, especially around exams, is artificial. And I would even add, quite provocatively, unnecessary.
And I guess that's where I was kind of headed with this idea. As a school leaver, I can remember feeling immense anxiety around doing well, but not to the extent where I felt like my whole life weighed on the outcome.
And that your value as a person was predicated on how well you did.
Yeah. There wasn't the same level of pressure for me to know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
Well, and I said this in one of the pods, right? In one of the conversations with, I think it was with Cam Barber, when I asked parents how many of them are still doing today what they thought they'd be doing when they finished high school, it's 20% or less. Like, we change our mind when we become adults. We change our mind when we go through university. We change our mind when we get a job and don't like it and go into a completely different career path. One of our good friends who runs a successful real estate agency, he started off as a school teacher. Then he developed a brand of shoe, and now he sells real estate, and he's happier doing that than anything previous. Like, we change our minds, we change our careers.
But that's the whole point to lifelong learning. We learn and we grow and we progress and we tap into strengths we never knew we had.
Yeah.
Maturity, life experience, they open our eyes up to opportunities that we never thought were possible because we didn't have the maturity. We didn't have the life experience.
And that was something that came out in every conversation. The learning for them, the desire for learning was kind of crushed in the school context, and their desire for learning and progress came alive once they left school. Now, this isn't a let's bag out school conversation at all. The school system has its flaws, and we're not trying to solve all of those right now, but rather just reflecting on the conversations. That's something that really stood out to me, and it's certainly something that we've experienced in our life, that when you're anxiously engaged in learning and growing and developing after school, you tend to get somewhere. You tend to have
and you
a
live
good
more
experience.
fulfilling lives because it's self-directed as opposed to, I guess, essentially living a life out of fear that you're, not going to be able to meet other people's expectations, fear that you're not going to, kind of live up to your own expectations. And I think that for our kids, helping them to find that love of learning. And right now for our daughter, our 9-year-old daughter, it's her love of learning of dragons.
Yeah, and worms.
But it actually doesn't matter what it is. At this point in the story, all that matters is she's curious.
Something that you said before, I think, I this is a little bit provocative, but I want to call back to it really quickly. You talked about the increased level of anxiety and stress that kids are experiencing that you didn't have. And there's no way to say this politely, but I place the increased anxiety, the increased perfectionism, the increased stress squarely at the feet of parents. When we have a look at the increased expectation and pressure that parents are putting on them. In a couple of weeks' time, we're talking with a guy called Professor Thomas Curran. He's a professor of psychology at the London School of Economics, and he's written a book all about perfectionism, and I'm talking with him about perfectionism on the podcast. It's just a couple of weeks away. But I just recorded that conversation a couple of days ago, and we're editing at the moment. And listening to him speak, he's not as direct as I'm being right now. But I think when we look at the unfair expectations and pressure and perfectionistic requirements that parents place on their children, the demands, they come off the soccer field, they come off the netball court, they come off the stage, no matter what they're doing, weekend, hobbies, school experiences, there's this relentless pressure that we as parents, I shouldn't say we as parents, that too many parents place on their kids to just get better, to not do it like that, to do it like this. Come on, you know better than this. You should be able to do more than this. That's the persistent message that comes up. And that's what's, I think, creating the stress that kids are experiencing around school.
I agree 100%, but I don't necessarily think that it's because we have bad parents. I think what we're experiencing is a desperate need of parents who love their kids to allow their kids and give their kids everything they feel like they missed out on in their childhood. And when you look at the demands that are being placed on parents right now in today's society, economic stress that we're experiencing, the changes to lifestyle as a result of the pandemic, there are so many different things that we've now gone through as adults, and our minds are already ticking forward to what's going to happen for our kids in 15, 20 years' time, and how do I prepare them best now?
I'm going to make a clarification on what I said. This is an important clarification. There's always been stress, there's always been pressure, there's always been those kinds of things, but it's risen to all new levels. And it's because parents are, number one, more invested in their children. And as investment in children goes up, both emotional investment and financial investment, so do expectations. And those expectations are generally unrealistic. Like, we've got good evidence that parents today have expectations of their children that are unrealistic, especially compared to a couple of generations ago. We just expect so much of them. And number two, parents with high expectations are often overly critical of their children, which leads to lower resilience and increased anxiety, and they're more controlling of their children. So my clarification is, we've got data from the 1990s through to today, and we know that parents are less autonomy supportive, which means that they're more controlling, and they're doing it because they're more invested, because they're more worried about the outcomes, because there's a belief that the world's increasingly competitive and dog-eat-dog, zero-sum kind of thing, and taking control is the only way that you can assure that your children are going to be successful. And that's where the problem is, because it's not the only way that you can assure that your children are going to be successful, whatever success actually means.
I think another challenge that we're experiencing, though, is how we view success. And our desperate need for our kids to have success in their lives is all tied up in how we see ourselves and how much worth we place on who we are as a result of what we achieve.
And that's the thing. We believe that we're successful based on external
That's right.
realities rather than what's happening inside. And everybody nods their head and says, yeah, I want my kids to have great character. But you know the messages that the kids are receiving? We've got evidence on this as well. This was a study that came out of Harvard just recently, a couple of years ago. And the researchers at Harvard said to the kids, hey, what would your parents consider to be successful? For you to be a good person, or for you to get good grades and have a good career? And the kids were like, overwhelmingly,
I need to be a doctor.
Yeah, that's right. But the parents, when they were asked that question, they said, I want my kids to have character. But what are we focusing on? You've said that. Now, we didn't set this up, but I've got a poem that I don't know if I've ever shared with you, that I looked up because I wanted to finish the podcast with this poem. I discovered it maybe when I was about 18 or 19, and it's always hung around in my head. And it's amazing me. Maybe I have shared it with you, but I don't think I have. I want to read this to you. This is a definition of success. The poem, we don't know who wrote it. I've Googled it, and it says by anonymous, but it says this: success is speaking words of praise, in cheering other people's ways, in doing just the best you can with every task and every plan. It's silence when your speech would hurt, politeness when your neighbour's curt. It's deafness when the scandal flows, and sympathy with others' woes. It's loyalty when duty calls. It's courage when disaster falls. It's patience when the hours are long. It's found in laughter and in song. It's in the silent time of prayer, in happiness and in despair, in all of life, and nothing less, we find the thing we call success.
I remember once having a conversation with a really good friend of mine who, when I was struggling to recognize my own worth in a dark moment, reminded me of how we feel about a brand new baby that comes into our world. And we've obviously just experienced that in our home. They have done nothing to earn our love and our desire for their well-being. They've done nothing. And just them being, just them existing, brings us so much joy and so much love and desire to keep them safe and bless them with every good thing. And yet somewhere along the line, we go from feeling that to feeling like the only way we can experience that same kind of love and joy in our lives is to prove that we're of worth, to prove that we have been successful. And as I think about all of the stress that our school leavers are experiencing in this moment, one of the best things as parents that we can do for them is to just remind them that no matter what, no matter the outcome, that they have got a marvelous future ahead of them, that their worth is not tied up to the results that are going to come out in a few months' time, that they can achieve the things that they want to, but everybody has an individual path, and there are so many different ways to do it.
So let's wrap up. Finishing school does matter. Education matters. but developing a love of learning and a desire to continue learning after school. For example, we're not trying to get through uni. We're trying to get uni through us.
Yeah, I think if I could restate what you've just said, I think education is imperative. I don't think finishing school at all costs is how we need to view things. There are different ways for us to receive an education, and I think we need to be fine-tuned to our kids' individual needs to recognise how education is played out in their lives.
Okay, nice recap. Plenty to think about. Good luck to everyone who is going through their exams. Remember, you are not your ATAR. Your value is in you, not in your grade. And we hope that we've inspired some useful conversations as we've talked about education at this time of year. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rule. I'm from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. If you'd like more info about making your family happier, visit happyfamilies.com.au or visit us at Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families on Facebook.